you're working with companies and helping them either with podcasts that they are currently doing, or maybe they don't have a podcast yet and they want to start one. I'm just kind of curious as far as like the advice that you give somebody, you know, before they start a podcast. What makes a successful podcast? And
Yep.
maybe just for the listeners who might want to have a podcast, what are some of your best tips to offer them, when they're thinking
So
about starting a podcast?
a couple things, and I'll send you a video too that I love to geek out on numbers. And I late last year I looked at what I call branded podcasts. So it's like a company that is doing a podcast. So it's not like a Tim Ferriss again. It's not a This American Life. It's literally, this company is producing a podcast ostensibly to make money in some way. So I looked at the most successful ones, and I looked at a year of their podcasts, and then came up with a couple trends that I'll share with you. But before I do that, the first thing that we always talk about with our clients is there is a world in which you produce a podcast that gets trivial listens, and yet it spawns this content marketing empire that makes it 1,000 times more valuable than what you pay for it. Right? If you produce a podcast and you follow the script that we're teaching people, maybe you find out that your Instagram videos are the massive thing that are attracting customers. Maybe the blog posts that results are really what wins. More often we find that each of these add value. You get likes on and views on YouTube and Twitter, and in aggregate there's this massive thing. But one of our clients, when we looked at their stats, the podcast listens represented only 5% of the community engagement they were having. The other 95% came from all the micro content. So the first thing that we always teach people is it is a podcast, but don't focus too much on the podcast. Like, realize all of the stuff that comes along with it. And that's not even including the qualitative stuff like building relationships. Like, I mean, you and I talking for this hour, it's a far deeper relationship than if we were just grabbing coffee. Like, it's a different way of relating. So there's a way of expanding a network through this. But some of the trends that we saw in that analysis I did of the top branded podcasts, the first thing is the top podcast. It's something like they on average have 189 episodes produced, and it translated to weekly. It was like 5.2 times, 4.2 times a month, or something like that. So they're very consistent. And it's similar, I like to say it's similar to investing, right? Like, compound interest is what makes investing powerful. It's the same thing of like producing content week in, week out that grows an audience over time. And there are graveyards full of brands that started a podcast and did it for 10 episodes, and then they moved on to the next thing. So you kind of have to be in it for the long haul, like you are. You've definitely been doing this for a long time. A second thing is it has to be tangential. And by that, I mean, a lot of the companies we work with, they're like, this is what our company does. We want to do a show about that. And it's again rewinding to the ideal customer persona and saying, your ideal customer persona, I don't care what you do, I guarantee they don't care about what you're selling them. If you're selling them air filters, they care maybe about a healthy lifestyle or what they put in their body or broader topics, but you can't just sell them directly. And we found that the average top branded podcast, they produced 44 minutes of content, of which they talked about the company for 11 seconds. Like, you have to think about how crazy that is, all the time and energy building this. But it would be, this is like for me, this is this podcast brought to you by Captivate.ai. We turn your webinar into 3 months of social media content. Back to adding value. And it's always the opposite. Companies want to really focus on the brand, but it's light touch. It's give value, build a relationship over time. The third one is it has to be interview format, like you and I are doing. Sometimes we'll work with clients that want to do a deep dive on educating their community. And the two reasons why you have to do an interview format, which all of these top branded podcasts do, by the way, the top two reasons is, first of all, it's impossible to do otherwise. If you're producing content week in and week out, and you have to come up with the content, you're not going to get past 5 or 10 episodes. That's why I started with Beyond the Uniform of interviewing people, because I'm like, I don't have this knowledge. I can't come up with it, but I can ask questions. That's pretty easy. But the second thing, and this really leads to the growth, is if you have a guest on the show, 20% chance, it's not too high, but 20% chance they will share your content with their audience. And that's where growth comes, right? When Scott sends me this file, of course, I'm going to send it out to the Beyond the Uniform newsletter. I'm going to post about it on LinkedIn. I'm going to post it everywhere, right? And because he's done this great service, he's going to get exposure to my quote unquote audience. And that's really where the growth starts to come and that's one of the reasons with this micro content for Captivate, we almost always the content is almost always about the guest. We want to make the guest feel like a rock star. Part of the reason is they're going to be more likely to share that video snippet or image quote or audiogram or whatever, because I've just made them look like they're a celebrity. So those, I know there's a lot there, but those are some of the trends that come out. And maybe the one last thing that I'd say is maybe that's intimidating for people who are listening. If you go back to my first 50 episodes, they're garbage, right? Like it's like anything. It's just everything you get better at over time. And so it's a great medium that's very forgiving to just try and just start. But just like investing in your Roth IRA, you want to start as soon as possible to get those reps in, to get those episodes in, to get that content library behind you. And one final thing for real this time, do what Scott is doing. We are doing this over Zoom. We're doing it by video. This video is so much gold here. We can turn this into video snippets and images and all sorts of things. If you want to do one step further, most of our clients, we advise them now, start with something live. If your audience is on Instagram, do an Instagram live, turn it into a podcast, and then micro content. Because again, you're getting more touch points. You might get a couple hundred people who watch the Instagram live or LinkedIn live or Facebook live or whatever else. So it's like, if you're doing it already, rack up the view counts, rack up the interactions. Some people will watch it live and never listen to the podcast, and vice versa, but you want to maximize that impact.